In the ancient world, survival was this daily struggle against the elements. And for thousands of years, civilizations all across the Near East looked up at the skies and saw something more than just weather. They saw the raw, untamed power of their most important gods. So let's dive into this story of divine power, a story literally written in thunder and rain.
And that's a really good question, right? We usually think of sun gods or maybe these big creator gods as the top dogs. But in so many of the world's first cities and empires, it was the god who controlled the storm that commanded the most respect. So why is that? Well, that's exactly what we're here to figure out. Here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll see just how big a deal these deities were. Then, we'll look at how ancient scribes and modern scholars keep them all straight. We'll meet Ishkur, the Sumerian OG, and then Adad, the Semitic god who went kind of viral. And finally, we'll connect all the dots and see how climate, culture, and power are all tangled up together.
So, just how high up the divine ladder were these storm gods? Well, as it turns out, they were often sitting right on the throne itself.
And this quote just nails it. We're not just talking about being a powerful god. We're talking about being the king of the gods, the one who actually gives mortal kings their right to rule. So in places like ancient Syria and Anatolia, the storm god wasn't just on the divine board of directors, he was the CEO of the entire operation. Now, you might be wondering, how do we keep track of all these different gods with different names from all these different cultures? It sounds like a mess. But the ancients actually had a system for it, and it's a total key to understanding their world. Scholars today call it a typological label. It's basically just a category, a job description, like storm god or sun god. But here's the cool part. This isn't just some modern idea we came up with. The ancient scribes were doing something really similar thousands of years ago. They had their own way of tagging their gods. Okay, so here's how they did it. The cuneiform sign for the Sumerian storm god, Iskor, became a universal symbol, a logogram, for other storm gods, even if they had totally different names in other languages. And when scribes made lists of their gods, they'd group them together by function. It created this kind of divine shorthand that made it way easier for scribes from, say, Babylonia and Syria to understand each other's texts. It was like an ancient Rosetta Stone, but for gods. All right, let's put this into practice and look at our first case study. We're going to start at the very beginning with the Sumerian prototype, Iskor. And when I say long history, I mean long. We have hints of his cult center, Karkar, from the absolute earliest periods of writing. His worship gets more obvious over time, but then, by the Old Babylonian period, his whole identity starts to blend with this other up-and-coming storm god, who we are definitely going to talk about in a minute. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because Iskor basically had a split personality. For the Sumerians down in southern Mesopotamia, who relied on these perfectly controlled river irrigation systems, his violent storms and floods were a terrifying threat. He was a destroyer. But for the people out on the steppes, who depended entirely on rain for farming, that same rain was an absolute blessing. It made life possible. He was a life giver. He was both feared and loved, sometimes at the very same time. And what better symbol for a chaotic, two-faced god than this? Ishkor's traditional animal was the lion dragon, a mythical storm demon. I mean, that thing just screams raw, untamable power. This is the face of a destructive storm. So lock that image in your head, because things are about to change in a big way. Okay, now let's trace the journey of another storm god, one whose influence would spread across the entire Near East, the Semitic deity known as Adad. So, as his fan club grew, so to speak, his name started to change. It began as Hadda, which literally means to thunder, but over centuries, as he was adopted by different cultures, it morphed into Adu, then Adad, and later Haddad. You can literally watch his journey across the map just by looking at his name. So, remember that crazy, chaotic lion dragon we saw with Iskor? Well, as Adad's cult started to merge with Iskor's, something fascinating happened. Adad's main symbol became the bull. And this was not just a random animal swap. The bull represents strength, sure, but it also stands for fertility, for the controlled power you need for agriculture. This shift from a storm demon to a powerful provider shows two cultures blending, and a whole new idea of the storm god taking shape. And get this, in Assyria and Syria, scribes had this cool shorthand for him, the number 10. Now that wasn't random. It put him in the super elite club with the moon god Sin, who was number 30, and the sun god Samesh, number 20. It's like giving him a VIP number. It's a huge status symbol, a clear statement that he's one of the top gods.
And as more people started worshiping Adad, his resume just got longer and longer. He wasn't just the weather guy anymore. Oh no, he became a god of law, a guardian of treaties, a partner in telling the future, and even a divine helper in war. His portfolio just exploded until he was a major player in almost every part of life.
And, any good king needs his crew, right? Adad had a whole court. His wife was Shala, the goddess of the harvest, a perfect match. His son was Misharu, which means justice, and his chief minister, his vizier, Nimgir, whose name means lightning. It's literally a divine family business, and their business is running the cosmos. Okay, so we've seen that storm gods were powerful, but we still haven't really answered the big why. Why they became kings of the gods in some places, but not in others. Well, the answer, it turns out, isn't just about theology. It's about the land itself. It's about geography. Okay, look closely, because this slide is the absolute key to the whole thing. On the left, you've got southern Babylonia. They had the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, so they used irrigation. For them, a massive storm wasn't a blessing, it was a devastating flood that could wipe out everything. So their storm god was powerful, but also really scary. Important, but not a king. Now, look to the right, to places like Syria and Anatolia. They didn't have big rivers for irrigation. They were completely dependent on rainfall for their crops. So for them, the storm wasn't a threat. It was their only hope for survival. The storm god wasn't a destroyer. He was the ultimate life giver. Definitely king material. So here's the bottom line. Where rain meant life, the storm god became king. Where it meant potential disaster, he was a powerful but secondary deity. A god status in the heavens was a direct reflection of a society's most basic needs right here on Earth. Their theology was literally shaped by their geography. The people of the ancient Near East built their whole pantheon, their whole idea of power, around the one unpredictable force that governed their lives, the storm. And it really makes you wonder, right? What are the unpredictable, powerful forces that we organize our world around today? What do we look to, hoping for good fortune and fearing disaster? What are our storms? Something to think about.